Welcome to the Left Shew Politics podcast. It's our end-of-year recap. And, did anything happen in 2016? Maybe. Anyway, we're going to get to all that. It's quite an honor, folks, because I'm actually here with the original panel that launched this podcast. My partner, Michael Malloy, the amazing Rachel Ramey, and Huffington Post film critic and my pal, Zaki Hassan. I'm going to give them a more official introduction in just a moment. But unfortunately, Jeremy Grockley could not be here today, and as you guys know, he is an integral part of Left Shew. It would not be the same without him. However, he and I did have a discussion just a couple of days ago. I would like to play that for you right now. Jeremy, how are you, sir?
I'm doing well, man.
It's really weird because this is as much your show as it is my show and Michael Malloy's show, and yet you can't actually be here with us, meaning when people that are listening to this are about to be listening to myself and Michael and Rachel and Zachy having a discussion about 2016. So obviously you and I pre-recorded this a couple of days prior, and here we are, but I could not imagine you not being a part of the show. Now tell our listeners, why is it that you can't be a part of it anyway? You and your better half are in his house?
Yeah, I live in Los Angeles, but my family is back in Texas, so I'm going to be traveling back to Texas on Christmas Eve, and I'll be there through New Year's Eve. And just with family and the holidays and everything going on, it's a little hard to make time for carving out an hour to be with the round table. But I'm sorry to miss it, and glad we found a way for me to actually be a part.
I couldn't imagine this without you. And just so our listeners know, I'm in Dallas, Texas, and we've referenced this on previous shows, and you guys have seen it on our page. Jeremy and I are good friends. We met in Dallas many years ago. He's now in Los Angeles. I was with him in L.A. for a short time. I'm back home.
Very short.
Yeah, in a very short time. Let's not get into the specifics, Jeremy. But here we are, and so when I hear him say, hey, I'm coming to Texas, my first thought is, awesome, we can hook up. And you have to remind yourself how big this state is, right? I'm in Dallas, he's in Amarillo, he might as well be in Outer Mongolia. What is that, a 13-day drive? I don't even...
Yeah, it's actually about 6 hours, 5.5 if you're moving pretty quickly, but... Yeah, it's not convenient as far as hooking up.
No, it's not. Now, listen, to shift gears here, again, the very last podcast that we actually did was... Well, no, that's not true. Actually, the second to the last podcast that we did, I should say, was you and I, and we had some drinks, and it was right after the third debate, and we
felt kind of celebratory.
We felt very celebratory because Hillary Rodham Clinton she didn't just win 3 debates, she dominated 2 of them, and one of which was the very last one. And some could argue she dominated all 3, but I'm going to say one she clearly won, the other 2 she really won. It's unfortunate that that didn't quite work out for us. So we had our last podcast actually right after that with Matt Makoviak, and it was sort of a reflection. And then you and I and Michael Malloy, we just went on this rant for a little while, and that's okay. We deserved it. So here we are, Jeremy. It is, in terms of this recording, it's about to be Christmas. We're a day or 2 away, and it's a reality. He is officially the president-elect because he just officially passed the 270 mark.
Right, he's going to be president of the United States in less than a month.
So my first question for you, and I just want to do a little Q&A with you because I wanted your perspective on things, and again, we can't do a end-of-year recap without you on here. So I won't give a whole lot of my thoughts or opinions. I just want to talk to you. Let me just ask, have your thoughts changed since election night? I mean, in any shape, form, or fashion. If they've changed, how have they changed? Better, worse, indifferent? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, well, obviously the world has changed quite a bit. Kind of a lot's happened since then. So obviously on election night, I was just like every other progressive in America who had been endlessly refreshing Nate Silver's page. The thoughts horrified, dismayed, and confused sort of come to mind, and I actually avoided the news altogether for nearly 2 weeks after that just because I'd been so overwhelmed and oversaturated with political information, and I was just exhausted by the discussion and obviously the outcome. And, since then I've really sort of tried to be introspective about it and thought about how had I built the bubble that I was in where I saw things the way that I did, and all progressives were sort of seeing the election the way that we were seeing it, and how could I communicate better with people in different bubbles, and what more info did I need to let into my own bubble. And that's really sort of affected my thought process on how to approach political conversations in general and what that conversation should look like, and with whom I and, other progressives really need to be communicating.
That's a really interesting statement. If you don't mind, I want to explore that a little bit. So how has your attitude towards political conversations changed?
I think I'm trying to make a sort of a paradigm shift in my own thought process and my own approach to these sorts of things, sort of, less anger, less arrogance, less mocking, which is something that, we can all fall into when we're consistently talking to people that we disagree with, especially when we're so diametrically opposed to their views, and sort of trying to make more of an attempt to explain and exchange the views that I have and talk about the why of the policy that I think is good, as opposed to just the what of that policy should be. And it becomes kind of hard because people are so entrenched in an ideology, and they act and react to information in ways that is really only supportive of that ideology. And that's not good, because an ideology isn't really an intellectual or rational position, right? It's a position of faith or belief and of sort of self-accorded righteousness.
Sure.
And that's all informed by personal experience, and that's how bubbles are built, right? That's where confirmation bias come from. So then it just gets really hard, not just to break out of your own bubble and into somebody else's bubble, but to then communicate the nuance and layers of complex issues, because not everyone has the personal experience or the education or, quite honestly, the personal interest to understand or to even try to understand all of those issues. And so that can make the conversation pretty difficult. I'm not sure, to be honest with you, that I have the patience to deal with it in that approach, but I'm gonna try and keep trying and be as intellectually honest and consistent within the conversation as I can.
And this particular election has been even more difficult in that department, in my view, because it is people are unapologetically fans of this guy, and he can do or say nothing wrong. I mean, nothing. Doesn't matter what it is. No matter how grotesque, how vile, how racist or sexist, there's always a spin. There is always some kind of lame explanation. There's some verbal loophole that they'll exploit that's just nonsense. It's been difficult, and
it has, yeah. And that's what I mean by from my own point of view, my own approach of trying to be as intellectually honest and trying to find some way to understand where those people are coming from and really communicate with them in a way that they're willing to understand. There are people that you're not ever going to be able to reach, that aren't ever going to be wanting to hear your ideas, or aren't ever going to see anything negative about the person that they support. So those people, I'm really just trying to avoid. It's not really worth engaging in those conversations, because that's where you get worked up and angry, and you start communicating with these people who have no real interest in trying to understand. They're just so adamant about the position that they've got, and they're willing to drag you down into sort of a mudslinging contest, and then you come out of that conversation, and then even with people that you should be able to have a rational and reasonable conversation with, you're already so worked up, and so you've got that fire built up inside you, and that comes out even then. And so even in those places where the conversation could be constructive, it's not, because we're spending too much time dealing with the fringes and the extremes and trying to tell these people that they're idiots. And I think that's probably happening on both sides.
Absolutely. And it's very noble of you to say that. I'm glad that you said it. I agree. I concur. And look, let's face it. One of the reasons that you and I wanted to launch this podcast is because we wanted, people to hear us speak, infliction, and know that we're not just some yahoos hiding behind a keyboard. But more importantly, we wanted to have a real discussion. And so much of what you're talking about right now, all the problems in terms of the communication gap between us and some Trump supporters or what have you. Well, listen, there's not a worse forum on the planet than trying to do this online, which unfortunately is where 95% of our dialogue is coming from, our exchanges are coming from, is Facebook and Twitter. It's the absolute worst platform ever for something like that.
Yeah, and ironically, it's supposed to be a place for sharing ideas, and it's become a place to just confirm your own ideas.
Absolutely, and on both sides of the aisle are guilty. However, one is worse, and it's a little bit of a false equivalency, because It just is, and I can get into detail with that. And if anybody that's listening has issue with that statement, send me a Shew Rick Twitter. That's my Twitter handle, and let's talk because I can get into detail. But for sake of time, as I know your time is precious, let's move on. So right now, Donald Trump is about to be president. He's appointing his cabinet members and.
Yeah, and everything that's coming out of his transition team is it's horrifying. I mean, the continuing run of his Twitter feed and the people he's selecting as appointments, it's just, I find it almost impossible to watch the news with without almost vomiting. I mean, it's that bad.
It's not just that bad, but even today, and for those of you guys listening, Jeremy and I are talking on December 22nd, and today's the day that Donald Trump tweeted that he wanted to basically calling for a nuclear arms race.
It's just mind-bogglingly stupid.
It's not just mind-bogglingly stupid. It's dangerous. It's incredibly dangerous. With that said, what I feel kind of funny asking you this question, but it's just a question I did want to ask you. What would you be looking for in his administration? Is there an iota of hope, or is there any appointee or any policy suggestion, anything positive about this nightmare? Anything?
Yeah, I haven't really come around to discovering anything exactly positive. I think that, honestly, I don't know exactly what to expect. Some of the appointments he's made can sort of give us an inkling of what we might see. I think that, like any administration, he's going to have some perceived successes and some perceived failures. What will be interesting to me is the how of the successes, the supposed successes that he has, because how you accomplish something is almost as important as what you accomplish, because it sets a precedent and it has long-term consequences. A great example would be the carrier deal and the way he, quote unquote, saved all those jobs. But the approach he went about doing it by negotiating individually with one corporate entity is not something that's tenable in the long term. It's not something that can be done on a broader scale with everybody. Everybody now can just say, oh, we're going to move to X country unless we get specific X deal from, the President of the United States. And that's just not something that's going to happen. You have to deal with it with actual effective policy and not negotiating individual circumstances with individual companies. That's just not ever going to work. So while in the short term it seems like, oh, he saved these jobs, the more you look at it, the more you realize that it sort of starts to fall apart, and that's not something that can actually be carried forward.
Well, let's face it, it's faux optics anyway. It's all
right.
It's all nonsense.
Yeah, and then I think the other thing that I'm realizing from the people that he's selecting for his cabinet is that he's got a lot of people around him who are feeding him these ideas and telling him who will be good and what's necessary and what's needed, and he's really just, he had this whole drain the swamp mentality that he was, speaking throughout the campaign, and what he's really done is he's just gone as deep into the swamp as he can and found these people who seem like outsiders but aren't, and they're really just the biggest donors to his campaign, and it's the richest cabinet in history. So I think that he's got a lot of, I don't know if you want to call them neocons or hardline Republicans or any of that stuff, but they're really feeding them this information, and he's just sort of a conduit for it to come out. And the dangerous thing is that he wants to seem so intelligent, and he wants to seem so righteous, and he wants everybody to think he knows what he's doing. And so he's making it seem as if these are all just his ideas, things that he's coming up with off the top of his head, through his own knowledge and his own information, and that's just not the case. And that's really what's scariest to me about some of these appointments.
And the word scary typically can be very hyperbolic, and people can say that, and it can be construed as nonsense. But let me just tell you guys something. You guys, people that are listening to us right now, it's truly horrifying the type of people that he is appointing and their views of the world. I mean, I'm telling you, it is making Dick Cheney philosophy look like a walk in the park. It's frightening stuff. And so Jeremy, what do you think in terms of progressives and not just how progressives move forward, so to speak, although that was a question I wanted to ask, but more specifically, what happens in the Trump administration in terms of the progressive wing of the Democratic Party or the Independent Party, the Liberal Party, whatever you want to call them /us? What combats this madness? Who does? How?
Well, I don't really know what the who is yet, to be honest with you. I don't know who's going to rise up as the next progressive star on the left. I think that we have a danger of falling into sort of some of the same stuff that, we berated Republicans for in the rise of the Tea Party and just being a party of obstruction and not really presenting ideas, just denying ideas. So I think that what I'd really like to see from progressives is being better at communicating the why of policy. And we don't really do a great job of that, especially at a leadership level and especially on a wide level, because, the vast majority of people who voted for Trump in some of these states would much more greatly benefit from progressive policies than they're ever going to benefit from conservative policies. It's just like there was just a thing out today that the states that voted for Trump have the largest Obamacare enrollments. And those people, I think there's a disconnect between what the policy is and how the policy actually works for them. So we need to do a better job of communicating the why and letting people know how those policies are going to impact them and their daily lives so that it doesn't just seem like progressives are the party of free stuff.
It's heartbreaking to watch people so profoundly vote against their own interests. It's truly heartbreaking. And these blue-collar rural workers, and many of them have been Democrats their whole life, let's face it. That's how Trump won this election. For them to vote against their own interests just so they could have this perpetual middle finger to the system. I've said all along, there's the faction of the Trump supporter who really is the racist, who really does want to just deport all Mexican families that are quote unquote illegal, that want to ban Muslims from coming into the country, that don't have a problem with the pussy grabbing and the vile comments and etc. They like that about him. He's the guy they sit next to in a bar, and he's their
right.
He's their crass uncle on the holidays. He talks like we do, and all there's that part. But then there is another part, because there's not enough of those. I'm trying to use a word that's not quite as harsh as what I really want to say. There's not enough of those individuals to get him elected. What pushed it over the edge in these swing states is the blue collar Democrats, the old school blue dog Democrats. That many of them have been pro-union and probably still are, but they're disenfranchised. They feel left out. Their jobs are gone, and their manufacturing jobs are gone, and they're looking for a scapegoat. And Trump gave them one, and he gave them one in terms of illegal immigration and bad trade policy and et cetera, when in fact the majority of these people's jobs are gone because by virtue of technology, the job doesn't exist anymore. But see, no one has the balls to say that to them.
Right, it's not coming back.
And by the way, not a Democrat either, not a liberal.
Yeah, and that's my point. Is like these people are looking for answers, and all that they're getting is either false promise or they're getting that feeling of being ignored. Like the Republicans are selling them false promise, and the Democrats aren't doing enough to explain to them how they're part of the system moving forward. So we need to do a better job of that. Like progressives, meaning we meaning progressives. I'm not a member of the Democratic Party, but we need to do a better job of explaining the why and the how of policy working and how it actually impacts the lives of everybody. And we've sort of gotten backed into a corner of identity politics that's not been successful, at least not in this round of elections.
The next question I had for you, I actually want to just plant the seed and to our audience and to you. And then it's funny because if you're listening, and we've said this before, Jeremy's not only just a dear friend, but he's as much of this. The left shoe is him. I mean, it's us. So, but Jeremy, let's tell our audience right now that we're going to promise them we're going to do a show right after the holidays, and I want to do a show that's focusing merely on how we can fix the election process. And I really want to get into the minutia of things about gerrymandering, about manipulating voting booths and disenfranchising minority voters. And then, if you would be so kind, sir, I want to have an in-depth conversation with you about the electoral college versus popular vote. Are you down for that? Does that sound good?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think that would be a great conversation for us. It would be cathartic, and I think it would be good for our listeners. But in closing, because I know your time is precious, let me ask you this just one final question. If there is one silver lining, if there's one positive thing that you could say could come out of this Trump administration, what do you think it could be? anything. I don't care what it is, just something. And you know what? If you don't have one, just make something up.
No, well, I think that one positive thing that could come from it is that it forces progressives to rethink their positions, not the validity of their positions, but how they communicate their positions and whether or not they can communicate to the majority of Americans that those positions are actually going to be good for them moving forward. So, when you suffer a defeat, you have two choices. One is you can pretend it's all somebody else's fault, and the second is that you can step back and say, okay, what can I do differently? What could we have done differently? And I think that there's genuinely an opportunity for progressives to step back and say, okay, something we were doing wasn't working as well as it needed to. What is that, and how do we fix it? And I've seen a little bit of both reactions, so I'm hoping that it starts trending toward the latter, and we actually make some genuine progress within the Progressive Party.
You, sir, are a gentleman and a scholar. If you're listening to the show, we're about to cut back to the regularly scheduled program. But Jeremy, I miss you not being on this panel with all of us. But thanks for phoning in, and here it is, guys. Everybody, brace yourselves. If you're not sitting down, sit down. I'm a liberal telling another liberal Merry Christmas. Hey, hey, on a quick side note on that,
I'm offended.
If you give me 60 seconds, and I know you have to run. Let me just say this. I want to say F you to every conservative that has turned this into this bullshit issue that doesn't exist. It never existed. Because right now, I'm out. I went to Costco like 5 times today leading up to Christmas Eve. And, every time someone said Merry Christmas to me, I looked at them and think, are you just saying that to have, a Fox News-driven agenda? And then every time someone said Happy Holidays, I'm like, what, you just can't say Merry Christmas? Like, it's just a holiday. It doesn't matter if you're a Christian. I'm going, this is what this has done to me. I can't enjoy season's greetings or Merry Christmas or Happy Holidays. Everybody has an agenda. This sucks. And I just want to say F you to all of you guys that made this an issue that it never was. Because when I was growing up in the late 70s and 80s, it didn't matter. It was season's greetings, it was Merry Christmas, it was Happy Holidays, and it was all the same. And here we are. Everyone has an agenda. But regardless of that, the smoke is cleared. I vented. I'm going to step off my soapbox. I love you, brother. Merry Christmas, man.
Enjoying it. Looking forward to 2017, man. Merry Christmas.
Likewise. So that was my conversation with Jeremy Grokley. But, before we get into the conversation that he and I just had, let me get just some basic hellos, right? Because we haven't done that yet. Mr. Michael Malloy, how are you, sir?
Oh, hey, Rick. I've got plantar fasciitis in my left foot, and I'm...
Hey, here's what you have to do. Take a bottle of water, freeze it, and then roll your foot, whatever that foot is, on that bottle of water for 15 minutes. Seriously, it works. Anyway, Rachel Ramey, who is an educator down in Houston, Texas.
Hey, guys. Thanks for having me back. It's an honor.
And then we have the great Huffington Post film critic, and that's like number 37 on his intricate resume, but the great Zaki Hassan. Zaki, what is going on, man?
Well, first of all, thanks for the compliment. I appreciate that. And not much. I'm on break from school, so I'm just enjoying being able to just kick back, catch up on movies. I just watched Hunt for the Wilder People, which is one of my favorite movies of the year, which I highly recommend if you haven't seen it.
Well, and as you guys know, he said he's a break from school. He's a professor. And he is also a professional film critic, and he has a lot of different outlets. HuffPost is just one of them. But Zaki, please tell us, just give a quick plug, man. When I say quick, I don't mean Russian. I mean, tell us what's going on with you most recently, and anything you want to talk about.
Well, as far as I'm trying to think of something I'd like people to check out, by the time you're listening to this, the latest episode of my Nostalgia Theater podcast will have dropped, and this is the last one for this year, and it's a fun one. It's a conversation I had with my friend Zara Norbach, who's a stand-up comedian, and she's a big Corey Feldman fan, and so we looked back and shared our positive memories of Stand By Me, which is celebrating its 30th anniversary this year, and I'm sure you all have seen it, and it's a fantastic movie, so we kind of wax nostalgic about it.
I've seen it multiple times. I know it by heart. My dad stormed the beach at Normandy, you son of a bitch. I mean, I know it well. And, as an old-school rock and roll guy from the 1980s, I would say that Corey Feldman was also on... The original Surreal Life with Vince and Neil from Motley Crue doing their deal, whatever that.
What was that, like 15 years ago? When was it? Early 2000s?
Zaki, listen, I'm going to ask you as my friend, do not age me,
yes,
please. Honestly, it was like 15 years ago.
I got to tell you, the past few weeks have done a lot to age us as we're seeing our sort of childhood icons dropping like flies in the latter half of this year. Actually, pretty much the entirety of this year. That alone has been a thing to just make you feel positively ancient.
Zach and I are pop culture junkies, and Carrie Fisher is been a significant part of my life since I was a zygote, and it's unfortunate. And then her mother passed away, Singing in the Rain, Debbie Reynolds, and then just today, the actor that played Alf. What's going on, man? Is it like the 1970s and 80s under siege by pop culture demons? What is up?
Well, I think they're under siege by Father Time is really the problem, is because, I mean, what we're realizing is all of our childhood icons are now in their 70s, 80s, and 90s. I mean, notwithstanding Carrie Fisher, obviously, but I mean, unfortunately, you start when you look at the calendar, the actuarial tables, and you realize that the next couple of years we're going to be taking a few more gut punches, unfortunately.
You know, it really is unfortunate. I don't know. It just seems to not be ending, but in terms of this particular podcast, because I'm going to break down in tears.
Speaking of gut punches.
Go.
Well, no, I was saying, I mean, we've got lots of politics to talk about.
We have a lot of politics to talk about.
You think?
And really what the purpose of this was essentially just to be a recap of 2016. However, it's morphed a little bit more than that. As you guys just heard, Jeremy and I just spoke about, if you're listening to the show, it was a matter of minutes ago. In fact, it was December 23rd. And a lot has happened even since then. And that's kind of what news is, right? It's in real time. I put a post on the Left Shew Politics Facebook page today. I said, one of these days, an ambitious filmmaker is going to get a hold of the Obama presidency. They're going to explore the cinematic aspects of his presidency, and I said, but I think they should reserve these last 40 days for a standalone film. This will be, if you will, the Rogue One of the Obama presidency, and it's these last 40 days. And let's talk about real time today now. And I want to turn this over to my co-host and my Left Shoe confidant, Michael Malloy. Listen, man, you've been really following the story. What's going on with the Russian sanctions, man? Kind of just fill everybody in.
Well, it's still coming out. Obviously, Obama came out with the public side of the announcements today of what the U.S. government plans to do as a response to Putin getting involved and helping throw the election to Donald Trump. Basically, the breakdown for at least what we see right now, like I said, the public side of it is they've expelled 35 Russian operatives from inside the U.S. From the New York Times, it said, taken together, the sanctions and expulsions announced Thursday calls them the most far-reaching U.S. response to Russian activities since the end of the Cold War and the most specific related to Russian hacking. Also, the administration also released a listing of addresses, computers linked to the Russian cyber attacks, samples of malware inserted into U.S. systems. So that's actually a bit of a development, too, because I had never heard anything about malware. I was just under the assumption that they got into a couple of email servers and then downloaded all the emails. But they've got really deep into a bunch of different systems out there.
Well, and let's set aside our politics for a moment. And I'm hoping when I say that, this resonates with our listeners, meaning our listeners are not just fellow liberals. This is people that are listening on every side of the aisle, whether or not you're Republican, conservative, liberal, Democrat, middle of the road, you don't give a shit, whatever. Whatever your affiliation is. Can we all agree as Americans, as just civilized people, that a foreign government meddling in our affairs, meddling in our democratic election process is egregious? It's unsavory. And by the way, that's like quasi-rhetorical, because I'm afraid that a lot of people don't necessarily think that that's such a bad idea, right? That's
the truth. I mean, we have Congressman Trent Franks just today said
out of Arizona, by the way.
Yes, I was just going to say that.
I'm sorry, Zachy, go ahead.
No, I mean, I couldn't. I was gobsmacked by what he said. He said, "Well, if it's true, then what's the big deal?"
They did the media's job, is what he said. They did the media's job in telling us the truth.
Rachel,
right.
what you just said was almost verbatim. If what Russia gave us was truth, hey, what's the big deal? That's the media's job. That was his comment. Like, the information that's produced negates this egregious act. I mean, it's twisted. Like, when did we become this way?
I think it's just, it's choosing the side. It's weird. This is something that we know, but it's choosing a foreign government in essence over us. Even like with the issue with the Israeli settlements and the UN vote. Of course, like, the conservative side loves it because Benjamin Netanyahu's aggressive stance towards Obama. It is the most polarized situation that I've seen, at least in my lifetime. I think we're all pretty close in age, but it's shocking. It is, they look at liberals as the enemy of the state. And that is why this sort of thing is okay, because anything is acceptable as long as it does something to disparage liberals in America.
No, listen, I'm not saying...
That's exactly it.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that the liberals are necessarily innocent. I mean, I don't know. We haven't, to be honest with you guys, we haven't been tested like this in modern American politics. But I would like to think that we are, and if we're not, F you to every one of you who are not this way. This is not about party. This is not about who's the next president. It should be truly about country. And we are at a point right now with the average Trump supporter. There's a Gallup poll, and say what you will about polling, and when you look at almost 3 times the popularity, Vladimir Putin versus Barack Obama with Trump supporters, it's unsettling.
Sad.
It's sad and it's unsettling. He's a KGB. He's an international thug. He has assassinated or has ordered the assassination of journalists that oppose him, and yet the average Trump supporter, hey, you know what? So be it. You can't make an omelet without breaking some eggs. We brought down Hillary Clinton by virtue of his actions, so who cares? And that's where we're at.
We do have to say that there are some old school Republicans like Lindsey Graham and McCain who do support the sanctions that Obama has set.
No, and even guys today, left from the Three Amigos.
Well, no, listen. Even the Speaker of the House today, Paul Ryan, did that.
Yes, he did.
This goes to a larger point. Is Obama? I've always said this. Despite his flaws, and he has them, he has always been a chess player when his opponents think that he's playing checkers. And so even with this, he's moving pieces around. With what? How many days in office does he have left? I can't do math in my head, but what?
Less than a month.
Less than
22,
like 24 days
like
or whatever. It's 22 days. He's doing. This is unprecedented for a sitting president to make this most of a dramatic move against a foreign government.
He's backed Congress and Trump in a corner, and they'll look like they caved to Russia if they try to appeal it.
And when you say that
was brilliant.
But a lot of those Republican senators and congressmen and whatever are coming out, and they are basically saying that, hey, we support this, including the Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan. And what is Trump going to do? Is he going to reboot those in his own party that, by the way, he needs them for confirmation process in terms of his appointees, or is he going to stick to his guns and just beat Trump and take everybody down with him? I mean, it's.
I bet he tweets about it.
You don't think he'll tweet about it, do you? That's come on. Are you on drugs?
I think he could certainly take others down with him, because if he doesn't, I mean, he may take that as a little bit of a minor insult if he doesn't get his appointees appointed. Sorry, I'm using a double word there, but I think it's all for him is that he's enjoying causing the chaos. And he's enjoying kind of staying in charge, and these people that he appointed. I mean, we don't need to get into the absurdity of that because that's another conversation. But I think he's just pointing people that he's seen on television or somebody else that's been indicated to him as some sort of extremist that's willing to burn, whatever department in the government down, right? And so I don't see him really that being like his big hang up, to be honest.
Well, and when I say posit, I'm actually going to sort of like merge what we're talking about now in the very first question. And Zachy, I'm going to start with you. The very first question I have with the panel is the same question I actually have for Jeremy, is how have your thoughts changed since election night? And I think even I asked Jeremy this question on December 23rd. I'm asking you this on December 29th with everything that's going on. So, Zachy, how have your thoughts changed since election night, if at all? And if so, which direction and how?
I've been thinking about this a lot, and one thing I've realized is that my perspective has pretty much remained consistent from the night of the election up to now, which is that what needs to happen is going to happen, and that if that sounds nebulous, my thought consistently has been that even before the election happened, ultimately whoever is running has a 50% chance, and it could go either way. So I went into that.
And by the way, I would have called you crazy for that, and you know that I love you, and I would have called you crazy for that on November 3rd. You're far more clairvoyant than I've given you credit for, so I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, I mean, this is not to say that I predicted him winning, because I was looking at all the same polling.
No.
But,
you didn't say that, but just by virtue of saying 50-50, in my standards, was insane on November 3rd.
Well, and unfortunately, I was very, very saddened by the way things went, but on election night, I was saying, Well, the work continues. Regardless of whether your person wins or loses, we've all got work to do, and all this shows is we got to work a little bit harder. That was me the evening of November 8th as I was watching the returns come in, and I think part of the reason I had to sort of take that position is because I was in class with students who were just sort of ready to wallow in despair.
That would have been me.
Yeah.
Yeah. And by the way, to our listeners, we have 2 educators on the panel, and that's a big deal.
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you that the next day I had, students were coming up to me in tears and just really in a dark place. And one thing I realized was like, I need to do what I can to sort of give, a lifeline out of this to whatever extent that I can. And so that was my thinking right from the start. And so that thinking has not changed. I think that Donald Trump is somebody who, you give him enough rope, he will eventually hang himself. And I have faith in
I don't know, Zachy. I mean, that is exactly what Hillary Clinton said, and here we are.
And Malloy, to both of you guys, I hear what both of you are saying, and Zachy, I'm sorry, I want to give you an opportunity to finish your statement, but I think that particular comment you just made is worth exploring in real time. Is Zachy saying, let's understand what we're dealing with here, and Michael Malloy is saying, let's not underestimate what we're dealing with here. And I think that's the problem for us that have been opposed to him from day one is how do we balance that? Because let's face it, every prediction that we made has been wrong. If you said, let's make a prediction that he's going to be a nuanced, philosophical person, I would put both my right arm and left arm on that bet.
And I think he's shown that that's not really something that comes naturally to him. What I will say, just to clarify, I think that ultimately we're in a position now where the inmates have taken over the asylum, so to speak, right? And I've been thinking about this a lot. If Hillary Clinton had won, this whatever Donald Trump sort of uncorked would not have gone away, right? All the sort of overheated right-wing rage would have just been kicked down the curb to 4 years from now. Right now we're in a position, if we're looking at a silver lining, it's this. They've got everything they could want, and they can wreak a lot of havoc in that time, which is not a good thing. But what is a potential good thing is that the Democrats 2 years from now, 4 years from now, have something legitimate in front, well, if you'll pardon the phrase legitimate, but concrete, tangible to run against, which is look at what they have done. Because we know, based on history, that whatever policies they intend to implement will not go well.
They will not go well. And Zachy, to your point in terms of, and I'm going to sort of build on something you sort of referenced in terms of what has Trump done for the Republican Party. And to me, It's a double-edged sword. If he lost, what he would have ultimately have done is emboldened this alt-right wing of the party that is powerful because there's power in numbers. I don't care what it is. I don't care if you're talking about politics. I don't care if you're talking about the restaurant business.
It would have been Trump TV.
I don't care if you're talking about comic book sales. There's power in numbers. And as a bar owner and restaurant guy, there's a phrase that says volume cures all. And quite frankly, that transcends. On the flip side of that coin, if he would have, and he has won, obviously, what that has done is that's emboldened that wing to a point that even if Trump disappoints, they're almost going to be more emboldened because they've been empowered. What do you do with that unstoppable force, that energy that's out there that you can't do a whole lot about? And no matter what happens in this election, no matter what really happens in the Trump presidency, he has, for better or worse, fundamentally changed politics. I mean, to a point of I can't even get my head wrapped around it.
I think that what he has done is he's announced that America is no different than any other country on the face of the earth.
No, I disagree. I think he has said that we are unique in the sense that we can, in a democratic process, elect Barack Hussein Obama, this nuanced...
Yeah, but no, that's not... I don't think that's really the point. I think the point is, other countries have elected great leaders and then replaced them with horrendous other ones.
Made, but go ahead.
No, I'm saying that there's a history of this happening before. And the idea that I think it's an explanation of saying that...
I'm going to be devil's advocate. I'm going to be the average person. When I say average, I don't mean they're beneath us. I mean just the person listening to our show right now. When you say this has happened before, please, what do you mean by that?
God, you'd put me on the spot to put a list.
Well, I am putting you on the spot because we're having a difference in perspective here. I want to make sure that I understand, our listeners understand. I'm not. This is not a gotcha moment. What do you mean by that? And explain that to me and to our listeners. What do you mean?
Beirut of the 1960s, 70s was a happening place that was European for people to travel to. Everyone would think that you eventually evolve out of this sort of, creating that sort of a civilization that's like based on the foundation of religion and extremism. Yet for some reason they went back to it, right? We just elected 8 years ago the first black president, ushered in this liberal democracy, and then we have completely embarrassed ourselves by bringing somebody like Trump completely disqualified in. How many times and how many places all over the world have they elected people that are so awful and so bad for civilization, and it makes no sense to the other people about why they would do those things? And I think what the answer is that even though I hate to say it, it's negative, but we were expecting from Trump that it was human decency was going to eventually, all the voters would reject him. We came to the conclusion that economic anxiety trumps human decency across the board, right? Or believing in things that don't exist. I'm just saying the notion that America is just this good country and that's why we do things that way. No, we don't. We function just like everybody else. We're just humans.
And and listen, that wasn't a gotcha question, and quite frankly, I'm very glad. I'm very glad I pushed you on it, because that was a remarkable response. So thank you, Zachy. Rachel, anyone want to respond to that, please?
Well, I think what Trump brought in to all of that is fear. He brought in fear into the country, and that's something that Hillary didn't address or go after in so many of the areas that ended up voting for Trump.
Now, Rachel, listen, I know that us as liberals get accused of gender politics or racial politics or whatever, and to some extent there is some validity to those accusations. However, what I also find interesting with those accusations is, I think for the most part, those are more like, no, you are afraid to explore gender and racial and religious politics because you were stuck in white men over 40 Christian dogma, and that's your deal. So with all that said, that's my crazy 35-minute my disclaimer. But as a woman, Rachel, I'm basically married to your twin sister. So the audience knows her husband and I are very, very close, and we have this pop culture thing that we do, and Zachy's obviously a very big part of that as well. But
Thank you.
We are. I'm married to a very liberated woman, and I'm also a father of strictly daughters. What we're trying to teach our daughters is that women are as powerful and as brilliant and as pertinent as men in society. And it's a hard thing to do. It's a hard thing to do in even modern America, much less when you're trying to be multicultural and you're looking around the world in terms of cultures that oppress that. And
absolutely, and that's exactly what we're
tough.
teaching our 15-year-old son that I'm raising.
Right, it's tough. But how do you teach kids? And Zachy, this question, and just so the audience knows, we're talking there's three of us on this panel that have kids. There's Zachy, who happens to be, by the way, a Muslim American with you have one son, right?
I have 4 boys, and we have a girl on the way.
I'm kidding, right? I get that wrong all the time. I go backwards. I'm like, you have 3 sons, 2 sons. You have 48
You're
sons.
expecting your first, right?
He has a turtle. He has a pet frog.
That's right.
Zachy has all sons. And then Rachel and Bill, they have a son. Then I have 2 daughters. There shouldn't be, in my view, anything differently in terms of what we're teaching our kids in terms of what is right, what is wrong, and what is necessary in modern America.
Here, can I interject on that? And because I've been thinking a lot on this.
And by the way, Michael Malloy only has dogs. But go ahead, please.
Yes, I only have dogs. Those are my kids. I've tried to focus on it because, I want to get into that brain, and I am definitely a white man raised in the Midwest, right? So I don't have too many I've never really had those issues with racial anxiety or anything like that. But I almost think that probably the approach that I think that the liberals are taking, progressives are taking about that issue is a little bit wrong. Without when somebody. Obviously, there's all these different layers. There's the outright bigots like the KKK or the Republican Party or, okay, I'm just kidding. But there's the...
I'm just kidding. They're not synonymous. Yes,
they're all racist. The best way for somebody to be able to get over, if you were a cult deprogrammer, pull those things out and then examine them and talk about them. It seems like the only approach that we've been taking is just identifying the simple fact, which is a pretty true, is that, by the way, that's racist. Why don't we ever talk about the why? Why don't we ever pull that out and figure out what their issue is and then give them ways to think around it? You know what I mean? I don't think that we deliver the right message to these people who are feeling this way, and not saying, by the way, just because somebody looks different from you, they may talk different from you, but they've also grown up in a different subculture. And, and a lot of them, they might not have as much money from you and all these different things that may make them different, but explain to them why it is. When people can understand it, that's how people are deprogrammed from stuff like that. I don't understand why we just accuse people of being racist without telling them how they got there.
Well, and I think too, just as a parent, from Rick's original point, the approach that we have always taken in our household anyway is conversation. You have to have conversations with your kids, and it doesn't matter if they're 5 or 15, like my son. And I think that's initially why my reaction the morning after the election was so emotional. I mean, I'll be honest, I even cried before I had to wake my son up for school because I knew the first thing that he was going to ask me was who won. And it was the first thing that he asked me. And the look on his face, I mean, it was just, he was devastated. He had nothing to say. And I know that he had nothing to say because he knew, I told you guys in the first podcast that I tried to limit what he watched on TV in regards to the election and the debates and Trump's speeches, because I didn't want him to hear that hate speech against women and against immigrants and Muslims. His best friend, who's like his brother, is Muslim. And I could just see on his face, how could he win? How could people have voted for him with him feeling the way he does about groups of people? And, like I said, you just got to have those conversations with your children.
That's what scares me about this election more than anything, is that I know a lot of people. I'm related to them. I'm friends with them. And many of them are probably listening right now. And many of them are smarter than I am, which is, by the way, it's not hard to do. They voted for Trump. And I have to park a lot of the issues that I have. When I get into the racism stuff, they might try to dance around that a little bit. It's not that they deny it. They're just, oh, he's doing this or he's doing that, and he's trying to appease whatever. But their overriding message is real simple. It's like, look, we think he's a douche. We think he's a jerk. But at the same time, and let's not get into the Hillary's corrupt and Benghazi and all that, although that's a big part of it. But it becomes this notion that, look, we as Americans have been cheated and we've been wrong for too long, and we cannot continue with the status quo. We have to bring in an outsider, and maybe even this guy, despite his flaws, despite that he's a jerk, at least he's a businessman, at least he's this, at least he's that, and maybe he can bring to the table something refreshing and different. And if he can't, at the end of the day, if he's a one-term president, it's still our perpetual middle finger to, and pardon my language here, our listeners, but fuck you, DC. And that is that by the way that's not a weak message. And then in conjunction with the fact that there are people that have voted for him because they don't like Muslims and they don't like Mexicans or they don't like whatever. And if you say that that's not part of it, listen, let me tell you something, guys. If you say that his rhetoric didn't fuel so many voters that came out of the woodwork, and I'm not claiming that every person that has voted for every Democrat or Republican is responsible for that candidate's own point of view. That's nonsense. But what I will say is that when you are empowered, if Hillary Clinton could have empowered the under 35 vote, if they could have been inspired to the level, and I mean proportionally speaking, as the KKK and the alt-right were for Trump, she would have had an electoral landslide. I will stand by that. I will say that, and I'm not being hyperbolic. It's absolutely true.
Well, I mean, two parts. Number one, Rachel was talking about having to tell her son the next morning. I mean, I had a similar conversation with my oldest who's 10, and he said, they went to bed, and the next morning he said, who won? And I said, Donald Trump. And he said, what's going to happen to us? Meaning as Muslims. And I said, nothing's going to happen to us, of course, but the mere fact that, like Rachel, we've tried to keep our kids away from this stuff, and we don't have cable for just this reason, because we don't want this stuff, sort of in infiltrating their psyche. But the fact that he's aware enough to ask that made me sad. And I came to the realization that, he was born and his awareness of sort of life was during the Obama era, and so I've said for years, I love the fact that my kids, their first concept of the president is an African American, like for them and all future generations
with a Muslim name.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. The idea of this barrier that doesn't exist anymore. I think it's amazing. However, the flip side that we're in now is that, again, my oldest is 10, and if let's hypothetically, if Trump gets 2 terms, my son will grow to manhood during the Trump era. And I think about that a lot, about what that's going. In other words, his entire concept of self will be shaped during this time when, for many people, his identity is one that should be disparaged against. And I think about that, and I don't know. That's just the sort of great unknown that hangs over my head. And I think about what am I supposed to do as a parent in that regard.
Rachel, go ahead, please.
Well, I was just going to say it, and ended up having a conversation with my husband after that morning about what more we could do to help our son and shape him. He's going to be voting in the next election. He'll be, and so, and we had to analyze what we did in this particular election. And sure, we, donated money, and I bought cute political shirts. And of course, I voiced my opinion on social media, but that was not enough. And it wasn't enough from any of us that just did that. And we need to go back to grassroots, local level and show my son, this is what you do. This is what you do for the stuff that you believe in.
Yeah, listen, Rachel, that is an Emily. I'm not Michael. I am sorry. You're always being Emily to me. We're not trying to leave you out of this because you're not a parent. Because first of all, you are a caring person, and quite frankly, to my daughters, Michael is their uncle, and even though we're not biologically related, and he loves my kids as his own. But and he has a biological sister, and he has actually literally his own nieces and nephews, and so he is not removed from this in any regard. But it is sad as a parent, and my oldest daughter came to me, and she was following the election. She's 5, and by the way, she's the most not gregarious. That's welcoming and warming. Precocious. She's the most. I get those two confused sometimes. She is a very precocious 5-year-old. She came to me after the day of the election. She said, "So did the girl win?" Because we are very much like girl power here, and and I had to say, "No, baby, the orange Nazi Cheeto asshole won." No, I didn't say that. I said, "No, baby, but why?" And she said, "The boys always win." I said, "No, she did." She did. I said, "Well, here's the deal, baby girl. Oftentimes they do, and it's unfortunate, but you know who's going to change the world? You." And I'm talking to a girl that's a Anglo-Saxon white girl with middle-class parents in a Dallas suburb. We're so more than blessed. It's not even funny. And I don't want to take away from her lifestyle because, quite frankly, she hasn't made more than 85% of the people that exist on this planet. At the same time, we are also trying to teach our kids of everything is relative and what is right or wrong. And you can use your, I don't want to use the word power. We're not power, but you can use your position in society to make change and to have a voice for things that are better at the end of the day.
Well, one thing I always say is that all politics are personal, and it's ultimately, regardless of the big picture stuff that's going on, it's our duty to, make change in our interactions in a whatever limited way we have. And to echo, what Michael was saying earlier about, there is this tendency to broad brush and sort of dismiss people as being racist or what have you. There's somebody who I have known since I was in high school, so about 20 years now, more than 20 years at this point, and she's somebody who I consider kind of an aunt, if you will. And I found out she was voting for Donald Trump. She said on Facebook, she says, I don't trust Hillary, and I'm voting for Donald Trump. And I remember just feeling it was like a punch to my stomach, because I was just like, oh my gosh, like, me, how can you know what he said about Muslims and about immigrants and everything else. And so I chimed in and I was very like, this is how I feel about it. And I didn't take a confrontational stance, but she says, well, I respect your opinion, but it is what it is. And I told my wife, she's voting for Donald Trump. And my wife started crying. Like, this is how close we are to this person. A few weeks ago,
I'm assuming your wife is a Muslim as well, correct?
She is, that's right, yeah. So a few weeks ago, I had given a talk about the American Muslim experience at one of the schools I teach at. And so I had shared that info on my Facebook. And so this person actually shared that post on her own Facebook. Somebody responded, and it's funny because she didn't tag me or anything. I just happened to see this. She posted that, and somebody on her Facebook said, "What are you doing talking about Muslims on your wall? Like, how dare you," kind of thing. And she said, "Zaki's like a son to me. I don't have any problem with Muslims." And it's funny because that hit me just as hard, because that was not something she was doing. Like I said, she didn't tag me or anything. I just happened to see it. And it made me realize, again, exactly what I'm saying about this idea that, politics is personal, that ultimately these sort of big picture things we might not necessarily have control over, but we can control in small ways the perceptions that people have. And those small things can potentially, have big ripples down the road.
I think the big challenge is that, from this point, we got to win all those people back, right? There's some people that are never going to come over. And it is what you're saying there. I agree. It is just it's so personal, considering the level of depravity that you went to in casting a vote for him. However, if we turn on them, and there's that tendency, and I am the worst at it, but if we turn on them and the only encouragement is just to down talk to them and to say to them the things that you want to say, it's kind of like we're not ever going to get them back. And unfortunately, we need to get people back on on the right page.
Well, no.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry to interrupt you, man, because the floor is yours. But when you say they, and we have to win they back,
I'm talking about the crossover voters. I mean, the people who are.
I'm going to be clear that we're talking about people that, because anybody that just hates Zaki or anybody else because they're Muslim, were never. They were never my colleague.
There are some people that are not that far off from the spectrum than you or I. The problem is that the liberals do not tell, the progressive movement doesn't tell the story correctly about why. Why is it not right to be afraid of Muslims, to be afraid of an entire race of people? Why is it that some Muslims actually do bad things? Why is it that some Christians do really awful things? You're not explaining the why. And if you are not there to tell the right story, there is a big old line of right-wing media machines right there ready to tell those people everything that they want to hear and fill their ear with a bunch of nonsense.
It's nonsense.
And if you don't tell the right story, that's what gets in their head.
But Michael, let's look at the post 9/11 weeks and watching President George W. Bush and some of the most beautiful speeches of his presidency. And by the way, the man had a lot of amazing moments when he stood on the rubble of 9/11 in Manhattan and said, whoever you are, we're coming to get you. It resonated with me. When the things that he did for AIDS research in Africa resonated with me. When he went to mosque in post 9/11 and talked about Muslims being our friends and fellow Americans, it resonated with me. But that Republican representative, much less a Republican president, is gone. It's gone.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's true. Yeah.
It's gone. That representative doesn't exist. That ideologically, it doesn't exist. When you have Donald Trump didn't just say we're going to ban Muslims, and then later he said, well, we're going to have a vetting process for whatever. And then people that I know that even pretend to be somewhat reasonable saying, well, he just said, temporarily, or he's like all that nonsense. The thing that really gets me, and I don't know, I wish I had it in front of me, but it was during the campaign, and he said that Islam hates us.
Yeah.
Right? He said that. And that's, please, pause this podcast, Google it, YouTube video it, find the video. He said, Islam hates us. There's something wrong with that religion. They hate us. This was in the last 13 months, if not 12 months, 11 months.
Well, here, let me ask you a question. Let me
But
pose
hold on,
this.
but that is fundamentally different than just someone interpreting, oh, he didn't mean ban Muslims, he meant have a better vetting process out of people coming from Syria. Well, look, I have over a dozen Muslim friends, right? And I hate to say that since I'm qualifying my stats. It's ridiculous. But I'm just off the top of my head, like, whatever. But I don't know anybody that are Muslim friends of mine or friends that are friendly to Muslims, which are a majority of friends of mine, if not all of them, they should be, that would denounce or reject that statement. But at the end of the day, that is, let's explore that for a minute. What does that mean exactly? But anyway, Molly, go ahead. Maybe you'll just answer it via your response.
If you walk up to right now, I'm going to ask you a question. Give me a real short answer. But if you walk up to a conservative who sees the world in that way that we are referring to, kind of like that is against Muslims, and you say, why are Muslims attacking us? What do you think like the answer is, or why is ISIS against us?
Because the Quran says it. Because the Quran is evil. Because the Quran says to do X, Y, and Z. And then my favorite response is, so awesome that you would do that. Can we sit down and talk about Deuteronomy? That would be awesome, right?
Okay. Well, let me go to the other side of it. Is that right? Which is actually blatantly false.
I mean, it's like let's call a spade here. Like, look, I'm an agnostic, so I respect and love Zaki.
But you're escaping my point. Let me finish what I'm saying.
I'm not pro-Islam or pro-Christian or pro. I am indifferent about it all. I just want all of you to practice what you want to practice, right?
Yeah, but still answer on the other side of it. If you walked up to a regular progressive, a regular liberal thinker on the street, how does he answer that question? Could he give you, I think probably we know, obviously Zaki knows, we know, I have a pretty good answer of why ISIS or Muslims don't hate us or anything like that. Do you think the average person on the street who even didn't vote for Donald Trump, average just Democratic voter, knows why a Middle Easterner or anybody would be angry at us, based on religion, or why somebody uses religion? Do you think they understand? Have any understanding of it?
I want Zaki and Rachel to take this, but just so I'm clear, are you saying that you are accusing the person who is making these accusations? They don't basically know what the hell they're talking about, right? In other words, when you talk about even as something as awful and painful as 9/11, and people say they attacked us for our freedoms, and I had to say as early as December of 2001 in bars having beers going, can we tap the brakes for a moment? They didn't attack us because of our democracy. They didn't attack us because of they didn't attack us because of Old Navy, because quite frankly they could have attacked Canada, they could have attacked Australia and New Zealand and Switzerland. They attacked us because in the fringe element of extremists, you want to call them Islamic terrorists, whatever, it's ridiculous because they're not religious people, but you want to call them that, fine, whatever floats your boat. But those people they look at American presence of infidels on their promised
coming up with the
land
truth is
Saudi
because you're
Arabia,
giving this drawn out answer,
and we're disgracing their quote unquote religion and everything else. That quite frankly, our bombs have killed millions, hundreds of thousands of Muslim kids and women and children, right? And that's
but the average person does not know this. They don't because care. They put it in there. They hate us for our freedom.
Because God didn't create brown people that live in the Middle East.
It doesn't matter what. Yeah, but
he created white people drinking Coors Light, wearing Dallas Cowboy jerseys at Chili's. That's what he was.
Rachel, are you picking up on what I'm saying? Rick never seems to to hear my message.
No,
I
am. I'm exaggerating to make a point. But Rachel, please interrupt me because I'm an idiot.
No, I agree. I think they don't care. I don't think they need a reason. I don't think they think that they need a reason. You know what I'm saying?
What I'm saying is you don't give them a reason. If you don't give them something easy to understand, something else will get in their head, like the hate is for our freedom.
Break it down for them. Right.
So that's the main premise of my point is that if you ask them that question, they know. You ask a regular, just kind of like Democratic voter on the street, kind of like bigger questions, they don't have an answer, even though they may have they're voting, I think, just luckily on the right side. I don't think they know. all these big questions. We don't do the messaging well. People can't answer it.
Well,
And that's the problem for the Democratic Party. That's what they have to get back to doing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Like conservatives say, food stamps are for lazy people and it's self-perpetuating, and the liberal just says, poor people need food stamps. Yeah, but that's true, but you're not taking it any further than that, knowing like the depth of all the different layers of what it provides to society, how long people stay on it.
But you're implying that the other side does and they don't. They are catering to the lowest common denominator.
They give them a simple answer because we don't tell them why.
So you're just saying we have to be as dumb as they are, but
no. I'm just saying that we simply need to improve the message in the way that we communicate it. Otherwise, these dumb answers to good questions are what fill the vacuum.
Let's move on from this because that is just one of the major problems that we're facing with the Trump administration, but. To bring this all sort of full circle, even though this has been botchy, and that's okay because it's been a botchy year, right? This is a botchy podcast because this whole thing is supposed to be a reflection of 2016, and for the love of God, everything from pop culture to politics to music to everything has been weird. We have Donald Trump as president. We have Princess Leia dead. Is there a more like extreme dichotomy of how screwed up this year is? Because I just don't know.
My theory, by the way, is that the Cubs winning the pennant just tossed us into this horrible alternate dimension.
They did. You're right. The Cubs.
I think it'd be a great movie pitch where a Cubs fan has to go back in time and save the universe by preventing the Cubs from winning.
That's hilarious.
It is like Back to the Future 4. And,
yeah, well, we got Biff as president, so.
And we like literally have Biff from Back to the Future 2 as president, and my goodness. Okay, so there's two last questions I have for the panel, and that's if I ask questions to begin with. This has been random night, but that's okay. We haven't done a podcast in a while, and like I said, this is the original panel back together, and yes, Jeremy is not with us. He's with us in spirit. So, two last questions, and then let's, as opposed to making these conversational, and it'll be my job to not only control that, but be the person who has to control himself more than anyone. If there is any silver lining to this election, what is it and why? And Rachel, I'm going to start with you, please.
Well, I think initially I would say no, but I do think it's a great opportunity, like we've said a couple times already, for the Democratic Party to really dig deep and search what went wrong and get back to grassroots, get back to the local levels, get back to, getting some of these 2018 Senate seats that are up turned and, just really getting out there in that communication, with the people that we lost in this election.
Rachel, I couldn't agree more. And listen, it's for a whole nother podcast in terms of the electoral college versus the popular vote, which I have been a proponent for the popular vote for, I'm 41 years. And and there's a lot that can be said based on what you just said in terms of that particular debate. But at the end of the day, and to give Michael Malloy a lot of credit, he criticized Clinton campaign quite a bit for not getting into some of these swing states in the rural areas and really talking to these voters. And it's hard to deny that with him because I want to, and the popular vote would supersede all that. But the fact is that we lost. We lost the election, and we lost to a great part of not primarily based on that alone. So there's a lot to be said for that. We have to get our messaging back. And for 2020, I'm a little concerned about who will face Trump. But that's a conversation for another day. But we need to get our messaging right. There's no doubt. So, Zachy, what do you think? What in terms of is there any silver lining to this for you at all?
Well, I think I alluded to it earlier, right? I mean, I think there's an Arabic saying that I always think about, which is that if you're planting a tree and the end of the world comes, you finish planting the tree.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah,
I love that.
And that's how I feel about this. It's like, well, the sun comes up. And that gives us another chance. And I think that anything that's worth having is worth fighting for. And, I don't identify myself as progressive because it's hip or cool. It's because these are ideals that I hold to, that I believe in, that I want my kids to embody. And, I think that if you have better ideas, then you present them. And this is another opportunity to do that. As I said earlier, they have their run of the place. And I'm not naive enough to think that things there won't be a lot of very real challenges and real hardships that people are going to endure as a result of whatever policies emerge in the next few years. But, this is a chance for the Democrats to get their act together, and I think, we have the Affordable Care Act repeal is the first thing on the docket. Well, that's as good an opportunity as any to see how straight the spines of the Democrats are and whether they're willing to do what's needed to fight back what could be a very painful, repeal potentially.
Well, and it's also an opportunity to see where these Republican congressmen and whatnot are going to put their money where their mouth is, or their mouth where their money is, or whatever, in terms of actually repealing this thing, which I think is
not going to happen.
Is a quasi pipe dream like the wall. But Mr. Malloy, what do you think? What's the silver lining here?
I think that I'm still in the recovery mode. I'm definitely way better than I was during the first week, and I had to go I was overseas for 2 weeks in India, and I don't know. I was almost for the first time in my life I almost felt myself embarrassed to say I was in America. I told my wife, I was like, let's just say we're Canadians. I don't want to claim myself as came from a country that voted for Trump, but I think I'm just gonna third kind of what Rachel and Zachy said. That maybe this will finally wake up, because nothing else has. This will wake up kind of the progressive movement that you need to get back to the grassroots, and you are the working man's party, and you've allowed them to steal it. I don't say it's not a net win for us, but if there is that one tiny silver lining, that maybe that's what comes out of it. But on so many different levels, this whole thing sucks.
Yeah.
This whole thing sucks, and I think that to answer my question, the silver lining is pretty simple, is that we all learn from this in terms that people are fed up with Washington, and that and as a system we have failed them. And I also hope that the silver lining and the people that put this man in office ultimately, not the racist, not the hardcore right-wing fringe, but just the average voter, the independent voter, the blue-collar Democrat for that matter, that put this man over the edge, will see that, look, despite our despair and despite the fact that we are looking for something that is contrary to all the shenanigans that go on in Washington, to elect a fascist, racist, bigot blowhard is just, at the end of the day, not the answer. But so maybe we all learn something from this. Okay, so guys, this is a great discussion, and quite frankly, I'm coming out of my skin because I don't want it to end, but I also want our listeners to actually finish this podcast and come back and support us in the future. This is our end of the year 2016 podcast, and what I would like to do is go around and do our famous predictions, and I'm going to start with Michael, and then to Rachel, and to Zachy, and then I'm gonna close it. So, Mr. Malloy, predictions, go.
Boy, I've really struggled on this one. The Affordable Care Act will be fully intact in 24 months. The conservative movement will simply repackage it and call it Trump Care, and we will have affordable health care going forward.
Well, that's very much what they did with Mitt Romney, and that's interesting that you say that, because it's going into midterms, which basically launched the 2020 election. Rachel, predictions.
I pray the old school Republicans like Lindsey Graham and John McCain will stand up to Trump and not allow his unrealistic, idiotic, racist agenda to come to fruition.
I just want to say high five. Okay, Zachy, predictions?
Well, I'm going to borrow a quote from Clubber Lang in Rocky III when he says, prediction, pain. Because I think we're in for some economic reshuffling. Yes. I think that there will be deregulation and things like that happening, and I think a lot of the circumstances that led up to the 2008 financial crisis look like they're sort of on a burner right now. I mean, I think there's going to be some economic travails, mostly for the middle class, coming up.
My prediction is this. By the 6th month of the first term, and hopefully only term, of Donald J. Trump, he will be at the low 40s and approval rating. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the Left Shew Politics podcast. You can find us on Twitter at Left Shew Politic, Facebook at facebook.com/Left Shew Politics. Search for our channel on YouTube, and you can find us on the LSP website, leftshewpolitics.com.